speech matters. Diversity matters. Diversity of people's backgrounds, but also diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. Universities are meant to be a challenging environment for young people to encounter ideas they've never seen, they've never imagined, and that they might passionately disagree with. If universities become homogenizing institutions that are focused on inculcating and indoctrinating rather than challenging, we will lose what makes universities great. The First Amendment is not about opinions you agree with. It's not about opinions that are right and reasonable. The First Amendment is about opinions that you passionately disagree with and the right of others to express them. It's tragic what is happening at so many American universities, where college administrators and faculties have become complicit in functioning essentially as speech police, deciding what speech is permissible and what speech isn't. You see violent protests that the senior senator from California referred to, enacting effectively a heckler's veto, where violent thugs come in and say, this particular speaker, I disagree with what he or she has to say, and therefore I will threaten physical violence if the speech is allowed to happen. And far too many colleges and universities quietly roll over and say, okay, the threat of violence, we will effectively reward the violent criminals and muzzle the First Amendment. And I saw a recent study from the Knight Foundation that said that a majority of college students believe the climate on their campus has prevented people from saying what they believe out of fear of giving offense. What an indictment of our university system. And what does it say about what you think about your own ideas? If ideas are strong, if ideas are right, you don't need to muzzle the opposition. You should welcome the opposition. When you see college faculties and administrators being complicit or active players in silencing those with opposing views, what they are saying is they are afraid. They are afraid that their ideas cannot stand the dialectic, cannot stand opposition, cannot stand facts or reasoning or anything on the other side. And it is only through force and power that their ideas can be accepted. I'm one who agrees with John Stuart Mill. The best solution for bad ideas, for bad speech, is more speech and better ideas. Are there people with noxious ideas in the world? Absolutely. The Nazis are grotesque and repulsive and evil. And under our Constitution, they have a right to speak, and the rest of us have a moral obligation to denounce what they say. The Ku Klux Klan are a bunch of racist, bigoted thugs who have a right to express their views. And we have an obligation then to confront those views, which are weak, poisonous, and wrong, and confront them with truth. We don't need to use brute force to silence them, because truth is far more powerful than force. So this is an important hearing. I thank the witnesses for being here, and I thank the chairman for hosting it.
Madam Ranking Member and distinguished members of the committee, I am honored and privileged to have the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Zach Wood. I am a senior and the president of Uncomfortable Learning at Williams College. Over the last 2 years, I have advocated for the importance of engaging controversial and offensive views on college campuses. When I arrived at Williams College to begin my freshman year, I had high hopes that my intellectual experience would stimulate vigorous debate and encourage robust and open discussion of controversial issues. I identify as a liberal Democrat who supports many progressive causes, yet I adamantly believe that students should be encouraged to engage with people and ideas that they vehemently disagree with. As president of Uncomfortable Learning at Williams, I strive to broaden the range of political discourse on campus by inviting speakers with challenging, provocative, and out of the mainstream views on pressing issues of our time. I joined Uncomfortable Learning because I wanted to push my intellectual limits. I wanted to confront controversy. I wanted to clarify the issues that challenge people the most and why. I wanted to discuss the content of competing arguments and how best to respond to unwelcome ideas and offensive speech. Humanity is not limited to the views and values we admire. Humanity also encompasses the thought and action we resist. To gain a deeper understanding of humanity, I have made a concerted effort to understand as thoroughly as possible the visions and convictions of those whose arguments I diametrically oppose. In doing so, I have faced considerable backlash from the student body. The acrimonious response was jarring, yet I resolved to ignore the ad hominem attacks and continue pressing forward. During my sophomore year, I invited pop math author and conservative commentator John Derbyshire to speak at Williams about race and national identity. My announcement of Derbyshire's invitation angered many students and faculty on campus precisely because John Derbyshire had previously made incendiary comments about African Americans. Within 48 hours of the event, the president of Williams College unilaterally canceled the speaker. Days later, the president enacted new speaker policies that made bringing speakers to campus an especially arduous process for my student group. What I find impermissible, undemocratic, and antithetical to the intellectual character of the college I attend is the president's decision to disinvite a speaker solely on the basis of his inflammatory remarks about race. At Williams, the administration promotes social tolerance, often at the expense of political tolerance. In my time at Williams, I cannot name a single conservative speaker that has been brought to campus by the administration. This fact is problematic precisely because the overwhelming majority of students at Williams have liberal beliefs. This adds to what many commentators have referred to as the echo chamber. In classrooms, liberal arguments are often treated as unquestionable truths. In some cases, conservative students even feel the need to refrain from stating their opinion in fear of being shut down. I appreciate the desire of my administration to ensure that all students on campus feel included. Yet I deplore the state of free speech and intellectual freedom on my college campus. In our present moment, Williams is just one of many colleges that has disinvited controversial speakers. At colleges and universities across the country, students face free speech codes, free speech zones, and other infringements on their First Amendment rights. Instead of nurturing thoughtful debate of controversial topics, many college educators and administrators discourage free debate by shielding students from offensive views. Yet one person's offensive view is another person's viewpoint. To some, ardent defense of free speech is characterized as a conservative attack on liberal progressivism. It is said that the real issues that need to be discussed on college campuses are not free speech and intellectual freedom, but racism, sexism, and microaggressions. To be sure, those issues are critically important. Yet the fundamental problem with this characterization is that all of these issues intersect, and none of them can be resolved without an appreciation of free speech and intellectual freedom in higher education. For me, free speech is not about grinding a partisan acts. It's not about promoting or advancing a particular set of ideological preferences. I care deeply about my education, and I value the freedom to interrogate all manner of contentious ideas and beliefs in hope of gaining a deeper understanding of the world and using that knowledge to one day make a positive difference in the lives of others. For me, free speech and intellectual freedom matters because free speech and intellectual freedom are among the founding principles that animate the vibrance and ensure the sustenance of our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And a final question. Mr. Abrams, you have been a lion of the First Amendment. You're a man of the left. I think it's fair to say I am not. You have spent decades defending free speech, even views you disagree with. There are examples that are often pointed to, indeed, at this hearing, whether Nazis or the KKK. But one of the things we're seeing on university campuses, it's not just those extreme hate groups that are finding their speech censored, but it's rather just speakers, academics with views that are disagreed, that are contrary to the reigning political orthodoxy on many campuses. Whether it is an administrator sending an email about Halloween urging tolerance, whether it is people arguing about same-sex marriage, whether it is an academic scholar like Charles Murray making arguments that are controversial, whether it is an academic scholar like Heather McDonald speaking about police officers. What is the value of the First Amendment in protecting the views of those with whom we disagree, and what does it do to campuses when only one side of an issue is allowed to be expressed publicly?
The First Amendment, Senator Cruz, at its core is an anti-censorial amendment. It exists primarily for the purpose of keeping the government away from certain very, very significant and sensitive areas: religion, speech, press, assembly. And the basic philosophy behind it is that it is important that the broadest range of views be heard and that the public be permitted to pass judgment, come to their own judgments on it. I mean, it's tempting. I get it. Everyone understands the temptation to say this view or that view is so offensive, so outrageous, that I'm serving the public interest by shutting it up. The First Amendment sends us in precisely the opposite direction. It requires at least enough humility to accept the proposition that I'm not the decision maker and that Congress isn't the decision maker, but that the public, individually and together, make the decision about what to believe and what not to believe.
No matter how radical, offensive, biased, prejudiced, fascist the program is, you should find a way to accommodate it.
What I would say in response to that, Senator Feinstein, is that if we're talking about the substance of the program, not the danger and credible threats, but the substance of the program, then yes, then I do think that the program, if a student group invites, then they should be able to. However, I would say a flat rule of mine was if a speaker comes to campus, he or she better be prepared to answer questions. And what I would tell supporters, donors, alumni who would say, how can you have so-and-so speak on campus? I would say, trust my kids. Trust my kids to ask them hard questions, to ask them pointed questions. That's how we'll get to the truth.
But here's the problem. It very often isn't your kids that are the problem. It's outsiders who come with a specific program to disturb and hurt, candidly.
Well, then you're quite right. And then with a private university, you do have the option of saying, this is an event that is closed to university students. Members of the university community are invited, and only members of the university community are invited. Our obligation is to educate.
Public university?
Public university obviously has a much more significant problem there, and I would be deferential to the Chancellor of Berkeley or the President of the University of California to have to make a very tough judgment call, particularly in the cases that you were describing.
Which, I might say, are more real than I think a hopeful audience might think. And I think that's a problem. And I think particularly in view of the divisions within this nation at this time, which are extraordinary from my experience, I think we all have to protect the general welfare too. And I appreciate free speech. You know, those of us that run for office, we run for office on the basis of being able to speak freely. But it's another thing to agitate. It's another thing to foment. And it's another thing to attack.
I think in many of these speeches, and it is one of the things that a president would take into account, if a speaker is coming to campus for the purpose of agitating, cases of speakers who post images of students on screens in order to intimidate or humiliate those students, that has no place on a university campus. That's not an intent to communicate, that's an intent to intimidate.
Thank you.
I've always wondered about people that did not test their assumptions against the arguments of their critics. And it would seem to me that would be, the importance of that would be one of the qualifications of a college president. And it was suggested by one of our distinguished panelists that the problem is with the students. And I don't doubt that with some students. But students are, by their nature, are passionate, mostly liberal, center-left. I certainly was when I was in college. And they go to college to gain the life experience and the learning that there are other points of view. So, with some exceptions, I don't really blame the students. They're in college to learn otherwise. I blame the administration. I blame Dr. Falk. If he, because of his politics, or because he was concerned about offending faculty or offending students or offending alumni, or was worried about his security at the institution, and I don't know if any of those things are true, but if the way you described is accurate, then he should resign. It's just that simple. Because he needs to explain to students and have them understand that they do not have a constitutional right in life not to be offended. They're going to be offended plenty of times in life. I'm not talking about hate speech, and I understand that hate speech is now supposedly illegal as a result of the opinion yesterday, but speech that's inflammatory, speech that uses a racial epithet, speech designed to provoke. I'm talking about somebody who wants to discuss a point of view that may not be popular. And I just, as far as I'm concerned, Dr. Falk ought to hide his head in a bag if he took a position like that, where another point of view in a civil manner can't be considered on his campus. Here's my question, as succinctly as you can, because I do want to respect the time. Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? I don't want a speaker to come to a university and use a racial epithet repeatedly for someone who would be offended by it, presumably everybody. I don't consider that to be adding to public discourse. But on the other hand, if somebody wants to come and discuss, as did Charles Murray at Middlebury, discuss the bell curve, and is hooted down and denied the right to discuss an intellectual point of view, I don't see anything wrong with that, even though I may or may not agree with it. So who wants to tell me how to draw a bright line here? Yes.
So I think personally that where the line needs to be drawn is when there is a threat made by, if the language that is being used in the expression of a particular viewpoint crosses the line of being a threat, that's when I also do think, though, personally, I try to consider intellectual value. So if I'm inviting a speaker, I think there has to be some intellectual value in bringing the speaker to campus, which is to say that I have to believe that this speaker is interested in contributing to public discourse, in adding their opinion as a part of the conversation with a particular issue.
From an intellectual point of view.
From an intellectual point of view.
Who
Yes,
else?
sir.
I would say there are two different questions here. I think Mr. Wood has put it exactly right for what a student group would do well to use as the standard. As a former university president, I would say my standard has to be, ironically, somewhat lower than that, which is to say that would be my standard for somebody I, as the administration, would bring. But for somebody who a student group might bring, then the question is this going to be threatening to campus, in which case it could be restricted, but otherwise, no. If a student group wants to put on an event, a student group can put on an event with one very powerful stipulation. Any speaker who comes to campus has to be prepared to stay and take questions and give respectful, decent, civil answers.
Okay, I don't want to go over, I'm over my time, and I don't mean any disrespect to Dr. Falk, But my guess is that Dr. Falk, based on what I've read about him, is center-left, substantially center-left, and that he would welcome center-left speakers, but he would not welcome center-right speakers. And that's the most intellectually dishonest thing I've ever heard, if that's true. And I would feel the same way if he were center-right and were excluding center-left speakers. He's not fit to be a college president as far as I'm concerned.